I never planned on disappearing, but one day I woke up and realized I already had. Not in some dramatic burn it all down kind of way. It was quieter than that, like fading ink on an old receipt. One minute I was a name on tech blogs. The next I was just a guy living in a town where nobody cared what the hell a blockchain startup was. They call this place Mill Creek, a tiny Colorado town where snow falls like clockwork in December, and you can still buy your eggs from someone who raises the chickens themselves. I moved here 2 years ago. No press release, no goodbye speech. Just packed up a car I couldn't afford anymore and drove until I stopped seeing Tesla charging stations. People here think I'm a computer repair guy, which I guess I am now. I fix old laptops, build Frankenstein gaming PCs for middle schoolers, and occasionally install Wi-Fi for retirees who still call it the Google. But that's not who I was. Not really back in Silicon Valley. I was supposed to be something. I co-founded a blockchain startup when I was 28, Ledger Node AI. We raised capital fast, got shouted out in a Fast Company article. I even had an assistant named Jade who booked my meetings and reminded me to hydrate. For about 6 months, I felt untouchable. Then everything imploded. We had a product we couldn't finish. Investors wanted deliverables we couldn't fake. I froze. I told myself I just needed more time, more clarity, more motivation. But what I really needed was to act, and I didn't. So the company crumbled. I ghosted the press, left my co-founder holding the pieces, and I ran. Now I spend most mornings sitting in my garage, breathing in the smell of solder and burnt plastic, listening to old YouTube sermons on self-discipline, like they're prayers from a religion I used to believe in. And most nights I stare at an unopened document on my laptop labeled Comeback Plan DocX. I haven't written a single word. It was snowing the day Caleb knocked on my garage door, I remember, because the power kept flickering, and I was convinced the whole town would black out before I could finish cloning a hard drive. He was wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big, and those beat-up Converse all teenagers seemed to own in some unspoken cult agreement. "You fix stuff, right?" he asked. I looked up. "Depends what kind of stuff." "Robotics controller," he said, holding up a shoebox with wires sticking out like some homemade octopus. "I need it working before Friday. Regional qualifiers." I paused. "You're on a robotics team, sort of." "I'm the robotics team." He smiled awkwardly. "It's just me." That caught me off guard. I told him to leave it on the bench and come back in a few days. But something about the kid stuck with me. The way he stood there shivering but determined. He reminded me of a younger version of myself, to one who once cold emailed VCs with subject lines like, "This will change the future of finance." Back before I got scared of hearing the word no. The next day I opened the controller. It was a mess, broken solder joints, mismatched resistors, wires labeled with masking tape and hope, but it wasn't unfixable, kind of like me. I got to work, not because I felt inspired, not because I suddenly believed in mentorship or redemption arcs, but because my hands needed something to do that wasn't clicking, refresh on job boards I'd never applied to. 3 days later, Caleb showed up again, this time with 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him. I hadn't asked, but he brought them anyway. "I read about you," he said quietly, handing me the cup. "You used to run a company." I froze for a second. I wanted to lie. Say he must have confused me with someone else, but I just nodded. "Why'd you stop?" The question hit harder than it should have. Why did I stop? I could have blamed the market, or my co-founder, or the endless regulations that choked innovation. But the truth, because I was waiting to feel ready, and I never did, so I never acted. "You're helping me now," Caleb said, noticing my silence. "So maybe that means you didn't actually stop." Something about that sentence, it stuck with me. That night I sat at my desk with the garage heater humming beside me and opened the old document. Comeback Plan, DocX cursor blinking on a blank page. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed it and opened a new one. I called it Move Anyway, TXT, because maybe it wasn't about comebacks or plans or clarity. Maybe it was about movement. Maybe all I needed was to move anyway. The weird thing about movement is how quickly your mind tries to talk you out of it. After Caleb left that night, I sat in the garage a little longer than usual. Something had shifted in me, sure, but it was small. Subtle, like the first crack in ice before it breaks. I wasn't inspired. Not really, but I felt itchy, like something inside me was waking up and didn't quite know how to stretch. The next morning, I opened a job board. Not to apply, just to look, like window shopping for a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. There it was, junior product manager, remote fintech experience preferred. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream redemption arc, but it was something. Something close to what I used to do. Something I could probably handle now. Even with the dents in my record, I clicked apply now. Filled in my name, started writing the cover letter. Then I stopped. I stared at the screen for 10, maybe 15 minutes, fingers hovering over the keyboard like they were afraid of catching fire, and then without even meaning to, I closed the tab. Didn't save a draft, didn't copy the listing, just shut it all down. And sat there in the silence. I told myself I was tired, that I'd come back to it later, that maybe I should tweak my resume first. But deep down, I knew what it was. It was fear. That old familiar weight pressing down on my chest, whispering lies like it used to back in the office. You're not ready. You'll mess it up. You'll get rejected anyway, so why even try? Back when I was building LedgerNode, I was the king of later. We'll pitch next week. We'll finish that beta after we polish the UX. We'll send the investor update Monday, maybe Tuesday. We were always preparing, always refining, never shipping, never executing. And I called that strategy, but it was just fear in a nice suit. One night, maybe 2 months before we tanked, my co-founder Marcus pulled me into a conference room. Just the two of us. No whiteboard, no data deck. He slid a notebook across the table, one I hadn't seen before. This is everything we've delayed, he said. Product decisions, press outreach, budget approvals, all of it. I flipped through it. Every page was dated. Every entry had a timestamp. And next to each task in his handwriting was one sentence repeated over and over. Every delay is fear in disguise. I laughed at first. He didn't. He just looked at me and said, Lucas, at some point, we either move or we don't. I didn't move. Neither did the company. That night in Mill Creek, I pulled out a dusty notebook from a drawer under my desk. I flipped to a clean page and wrote the same thing Marcus had. Every delay is fear in disguise. Then I circled it twice. It didn't fix anything, but it was a start. A few days later, Caleb came back to the garage. He had his controller in one hand and a sandwich in the other. I brought you food, he said, because I figured if I didn't, you'd forget to eat again. I smirked. You stalking me now? Nope, just observant. Also, your garage light's been on till like 3 a.m. every night. He sat down on the stool across from me and pulled out a sketch pad. You ever feel like time moves differently when you're scared, he asked. The question surprised me. I nodded slowly. Like molasses. Yeah, he said. I get stuck in my head a lot. Before I came to you, I almost quit the competition. Just couldn't picture myself winning. Still can't. I paused, looked at him for a long second. Picture yourself trying, I said. That's the win most people never reach. That night, I reopened the job board listing I'd closed before it was gone. Expired filled. I'd missed it, and for a second, I felt that old weight crawl back. But then I did something different. I wrote a list. 5 tasks I'd been putting off, not huge ones, just things I knew I needed to do. Things that would move me forward, even if only an inch. 1. Rebuild my resume. 2. Respond to that email from my old colleague, Jen. 3. Write 1 blog post, even if it sucked. Read something non-tech related. Walk to the river trail in the morning. No excuses. I called it the movement list. Not because it sounded cool, but because I was done waiting for motivation to come save me. I realized something in that moment. Motivation doesn't start the engine. Movement does. Even the smallest steps create momentum. And momentum, that's what shatters fear's illusion of permanence. By the end of the week, I had 3 blog posts published on Medium, nothing fancy, just raw. Honest thoughts about failure, fear, and what it means to begin again. I didn't market them, didn't post them to LinkedIn or Reddit or anywhere else, but one morning I got an email. Subject line, your blog made me cry in the best way. Just a stranger, a 22-year-old, who said they'd been too afraid to start their art portfolio until they read my post. I didn't know other people got stuck, like I did. They wrote, that one sentence made everything worth it. I don't know if I believe in fate, but I do believe in this. The difference between the life you want and the one you have is what you do when you're scared. And I was scared, still am most days, but now I move anyway. They never tell you that starting over feels a lot like learning to walk again. Wobbly, embarrassing, a little painful. After that week of scribbling in notebooks and half-done blog drafts, I was starting to feel the itch again, the one that says, maybe I could be something more than just a ghost with Wi-Fi tools and soldering burns, but momentum. Momentum doesn't come clean. It's messy, and the second I started feeling a sliver of progress, my brain did what it always does. It whispered doubts. Who do you think you are? Helping some kid doesn't erase what you did. You're a cautionary tale, not a comeback story. Still, I kept meeting with Caleb. 3 afternoons a week, he'd come into the garage carrying tangled wires, coffee, and questions I didn't always have the answers to. We worked on his robot, if you could call it that. It looked more like a rolling toaster on training wheels than anything competitive. But he was proud of it, and that pride started rubbing off on me. He called the robot Rudy, said it was short for rudimentary. I told him it sounded more like a high school linebacker, and he liked that even more. Every little milestone we hit, making the motor spin, coding the sensor to follow a black line, felt like a tiny punch against the darkness that had been sitting on my chest for years. But I still held back. I didn't tell him everything. I kept referring to my past like it was a rumor. I'd say, back when I worked in tech or in my last job, and leave out the weight of what really happened. And part of me was scared. Not scared of Caleb judging me, but scared of what it would mean if I let someone see me try again and fail again. So instead of owning it, I played small. I'd help with code, but avoid deep conversations. I'd encourage him, but I wouldn't let myself believe his optimism could apply to me too. One night he stayed later than usual. The garage heater hummed in the corner, and the wind outside made the old walls creak like they were about to confess something. We were testing Rudy's object avoidance sensor. It didn't work. Again, Caleb groaned and flopped onto the floor. "This thing hates me," I laughed. "Nah, you just forgot the semicolon." He looked up. "You ever want to give up?" It wasn't a deep question. He asked it like someone asking for a pencil. But I felt it hit something real in my chest. All the time I said. He sat up. "Yeah, but you didn't." That made me pause. "Yes, I did," I whispered before I even realized I was saying it out loud. He blinked. "No, you didn't. You're still here. You're still showing up." Then he said something that I didn't expect. "You're the guy who fought back." That sentence did something to me. It scraped something loose. Something I didn't know was still there because nobody had called me that before. A failure, sure. A fraud been there, but a fighter that was new. After Caleb left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at my open laptop. The blinking cursor in my writing app felt like it was daring me to do something bold. My fingers hovered for a while, then I started to type. Not a plan, not a pitch, not some overly polished think piece, just the truth. I wrote about the startup that failed. The nights I pretended to be okay, the guilt I carried like a weighted vest in my chest. I wrote about being too scared to even try applying for a job because failure felt like a death sentence. And I wrote about the kid who walked into my garage one day and accidentally handed me a mirror. It wasn't perfect. I misspelled things. I rambled. I contradicted myself, but it was real. And when I finished, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. Clicked. Publish. At first, I just sat there waiting for the panic to hit. Waiting for the voice in my head to scream, "You idiot! What did you just do?" But it never came. Instead, something else showed up, stillness, like I'd finally opened a door I'd been afraid to even knock on. The next morning, the blog had 12 views, all from bots. Probably. Didn't matter. It wasn't about going viral. It was about breaking the seal, doing the thing before I felt ready. That post was the first domino. Over the next few days, I wrote more. Sometimes just a paragraph, sometimes a whole rant, but I kept publishing, kept showing up. Caleb noticed the change. "You seem lighter," he said. I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just finally emptying the closet." He laughed. "Well, keep going. Rudy needs a new arm." That's when I realized something. I wasn't helping Caleb fix his robot. He was helping me fix mine. Only my robot wasn't made of gears and wires. It was made of shame and fear and silence. And every line of code we debugged, every sensor we rewired. It was me, slowly rewriting myself. Momentum doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with a whisper. It starts with a shaky breath and a line of messy text and a robot named Rudy that refuses to turn left when it's supposed to. But that's okay because every little glitch is a chance to grow. Every imperfect step is still a step, and for the first time in years, I wasn't just watching my life from the sidelines, I was moving. Messy, uncertain, but forward, and that was enough. When my third blog post passed 1,000 views, I didn't panic. Not at first. It felt good, actually, like I had a voice again, like maybe people were listening. Then I got the email. Subject line, Urgent reputational damage impending. Litigation. It was from an attorney I vaguely remembered from 2 years ago. He represented one of our early investors, a guy who wore $1,000 shoes and believed in disruption like it was a religion. Now he wanted to sue me. The email was full of legal jargon, but the gist was clear. He was accusing me of fraud. Apparently my blog had stirred something. He claimed it proved I knew about the startup's collapse long before it happened, and chose not to act, that I'd lied by omission, that I'd manipulated the market, that I'd failed to disclose the truth to our stakeholders. It didn't matter that the company never made a dime off his investment, or that I had receipts showing how we burned through our savings trying to fix what was broken. He had money. He had time, and I had a blog. At first I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt absurd. I hadn't even said anything that specific. My posts were about fear and silence and the guilt of not doing enough. But in his eyes, guilt was as good as a confession. And just like that, I was back where I started, on the edge of visibility, staring down the barrel of public shame. For 3 days, I didn't write a single word, didn't open my laptop, didn't answer Caleb's texts. I told myself I needed time to think. But really, I was hiding again, just like before. Then Sharon showed up at my door. She's been my neighbor since I moved here, 72 years old. Ex-real estate broker, wears North Face jackets like armor, and has a sarcasm game strong enough to slice through granite. She didn't knock. Just walked into my garage like she owned the place, holding a steaming mug and a stare that could melt ice. I read your blog, she said. I blinked. You read my blog? I'm old, not dead. I even shared it with my hiking group, Betty cried. Don't tell her I said that. I tried to smile, but it didn't land. She sat down across from me and put the mug on the table. You look like hell, thanks. Good, you deserve to. That caught me off guard. She leaned forward. You opened your heart to the world. That takes guts, but now someone's threatening to shut it all down, and you're gonna crawl back into your shell and pretend none of it happened. It's a lawsuit, Sharon. It's fear, she shot back. Silence, then she softened. You've got two choices, Lucas. You can let this define you, or you can show up and tell your story, all of it, on your terms. I swallowed hard. I don't know if I can. Yes, you do, she said. You just don't want to feel it again. She stood up, tapped the mug, and walked out. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Caleb, about how he said I was the guy who fought back, about how this moment, this decision wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about finally owning it. All of it, the silence, the inaction, the damage, the truth. So I called the lawyer listed in the email and told him I'd show up to mediation. Not to fight, not to win, but to speak. The day of the meeting, I wore a jacket I hadn't touched since San Francisco. It still smelled like ambition. When I walked into the room, I saw the investor sitting across the table, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. He didn't recognize me at first. When he did, he smiled like a man already counting his victory. I sat down, heart pounding, hands cold. Then I opened the folder in front of me. Inside were printed copies of my blogs, marked, highlighted with dates and footnotes, and I spoke. I told the room about the sleepless nights, the bad calls, the fear that made me freeze. I told them how I stopped acting because I didn't know how to face failure without falling apart. I didn't offer excuses. I just offered the truth. When I finished, there was a long silence. The investor leaned back, arms crossed. Then surprisingly, he said nothing. The mediator thanked me. No outburst, no insults, no threats, just silence. And for once, it wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. A week later, I got another email. The suit was dropped. No apology, no explanation, just gone, like a bad dream that finally let go. That night, I walked to the river trail. No podcast, no phone, just me, and the sound of the water moving forward 1 inch at a time. And I thought to myself, maybe that's all I have to do. Not sprint, not leap, just move forward, inch by inch. When I got home, Caleb was waiting on my porch. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Yeah, I think I am. He smiled. Cool, 'cause Rudy exploded again. I laughed harder than I had in months. Let's go fix him, I said. And I meant it. I always thought redemption would come with applause, maybe some grand moment of recognition, like a standing ovation, or a glossy interview where I say something poetic that goes viral on LinkedIn. Turns out it doesn't work like that. Sometimes redemption just feels like peace. In peace, that's quiet. It had been 2 weeks since the lawsuit disappeared into the void. No headlines, no close your email, just silence. But this time it didn't bother me. I wasn't looking for permission to move forward anymore. I'd already started. Caleb's robotics competition was 3 days away. His robot, Rudy 20, had evolved. Sleeker, smarter still. Stubborn but with a heart of wires and code stitched together by late nights and more duct tape than I'll admit. We worked side by side every day, tweaking sensors, refining code, practicing obstacle courses in my garage with chairs and laundry baskets. I hadn't realized how much I missed building things, not just tech, but momentum, trust, rhythm. Every test run that failed wasn't a failure. It was just data, just like everything else in life. The night before the big day, Caleb looked nervous. He stood in the garage, twisting his hoodie string like it held his confidence hostage. "What if I mess up?" he asked. "You will," I said, smiling. "And then you'll keep going." He let out a breath. "That's what you did, right?" I paused. "Eventually, yeah." He nodded slowly. Then he added something that caught me off guard. "I don't really care if I win. I just don't want to go back to who I was before I met you." I felt that in my bones. "I know the feeling," I whispered. The next morning, the gym was packed. Folding chairs, clipboards, kids in matching shirts, tables with laptops and wires and stickers that said things like QTRL plus win. Caleb stood at his station, arms crossed, watching the other teams. They had more gear, more people, more funding, but they didn't have his heart, and they definitely didn't have Rudy. When the match started, Rudy glitched in the first round, swerved left when it should have gone straight. I saw Caleb clench his jaw. He took a breath, then calmly reset the sensor. By round 3, Rudy was gliding across the mat like he owned it. Obstacle cleared finals, reached victory close, and then he won first place. Just him. One kid, one robot, one shot, and he nailed it. I stood at the edge of the crowd clapping like an idiot. But it wasn't for the trophy, it was for the moment he didn't give up, the moment he acted anyway. Later that week, I got a call from an old friend, Jen, a former colleague from the startup days. She'd been following my blog, quietly cheering me on from the shadows. Now she was working at a fintech incubator in Austin. They were launching a mentorship accelerator. "You'd be perfect for it," she said. "It's not about flashy returns, it's about rebuilding trust in the system. We want people who've lived through the crash and chose to grow." I didn't answer right away. That night I walked by the river again. No music, no podcasts, just me, and a little more clarity. I thought about the offer. It was tempting, a clean return to the world I'd run from. But something inside me had changed. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the work. The real gritty, often unseen work of helping someone else find their way through the valley, the kind Caleb and I did in that freezing garage. So I told Jen, "Thank you," and I said no. Instead, I started a local mentorship group. Just 6 kids at first. No startup pitches, no VCs, just humans learning how to move forward. One action at a time. People ask me now if I'm back. Back in tech, back in business, back in the game. I don't know how to answer that because I'm not trying to go back. I'm building something new. And it doesn't need headlines or funding rounds or redemption arcs written by someone else. What I know is this. Every morning I wake up and do one small thing I don't feel ready for. I write, I teach, I walk through the fear. And somewhere between yesterday's doubts and today's step, I became someone who acts. Not because I have it all figured out, but because I finally understood the life I wanted wasn't waiting for me to feel inspired. It was waiting for me to move. These days, Caleb still stops by sometimes. He brings me broken drones and half-baked ideas. He also brings snacks, which, let's be honest, is the real gift. We don't talk about the competition much. We talk about what's next, about how progress doesn't always look like trophies. Sometimes it just looks like showing up. I may never run another company. I may never clear my name in the eyes of every critic. But that's not the point anymore. The point is this: I act every day, no matter what, and that's more than enough. Because I'm not the man who won, I'm the man who acted anyway.